Mr. O'Shea.
Yeah.
We're now live, Mr. O'Shea, so sorry. Third time lucky.
Thank you. I'll start again then. I'm not, as I said earlier, I'm not a political animal. I'm here as a community representative. I'm a community-based person, and I'm very proud of the community that I represent, and I'm very proud of this council, the way that it looks after the communities across Leicestershire. As I said, it appears to me that our Labour colleagues and Liberal Democrat colleagues would not like us to see and have a fair, balanced budget and to fail in that cause. Now, that would put our residents, our vulnerable residents and services at risk. We need to perform a balanced budget as a council. During this pandemic, this council has protected the vulnerable across Leicestershire. It has supported free school meals to children before the government stepped in. This council works hard for the communities across Leicestershire. We have provided grants for food to vulnerable people during the pandemic. We've helped across various communities. We've spent a lot of money, but we have made sure that our vulnerable communities have been looked after. I am proud to say what this council has done during lockdown is nothing short of community spirit. I have been proud of the non-political alliance of all parties during this pandemic. We have all worked together. But today it seems that politics are being put before vulnerable people. And we should not allow politics to enter this. We should be working together for the benefit of Leicestershire, our vulnerable people, our vulnerable elderly, our vulnerable children, and to work together to look after the vital services that this council provides. I am not one here today that wants to see council tax increases. I'm well known as one that wants to see low increases. But we need that money to make sure that those vulnerable people in society that we are charged at looking after are protected. That is why we are proposing what we are proposing today with a heavy heart. We don't want to do this. We don't want to have to put the council tax up to the rate that it's going. We know families are struggling. We know they are struggling on the breadline, but we have no chance of meeting a proper balanced budget without putting this forward and voting on it. Forget politics. Get back to working together like we have done over the last year, arm in arm, working, not Liberals, not Labour, not Conservative, but human beings working together to protect our communities and the vulnerable. That's the way I look at it, and that's the way I sit as a candidate looking after my community. There has been no alternative budget put forward, so what do we do? Do we just let everything fall to pieces? We cannot, for the sake of the communities that we serve. So with a heavy heart, I vote and will support this budget, not lightly I say, but for the vital services that we provide to our vulnerable people across Leicestershire. Madam Chairman, God bless you, and thank you to all officers for what you have done and councillors for what you have done for the communities over this year. You should be proud of yourselves.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Shea. Mr. Pendleton, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, sheer electioneering, that's all I can say. You know, if we listen to the opposition, it's all over. That's it. It's done. It's finished. Doom and gloom, sackcloth and ashes. Far from it. We are Leicestershire. We are producing a balanced budget. We'll not be cowed, and we are getting on with it. I wouldn't mind so much, but as both Lee and Ozzy have said, the opposition so far have put forward absolutely no alternatives. That actually speaks louder than anything else. You know, this year has been unprecedented, and we've seen nationally that we've all pulled together. What a pity locally we can't seem to do that today. I want to thank my department for exactly what they have done. You know, mindful of the district's curbside refuse collection problems, we managed to keep our refuse sites open. We've put street lighting LEDs in and saved thousands of pounds. We've completed road schemes, the A46 Anstey scheme, the Foss Park Major Signals upgrade, M1 Junction 23 upgrade, you know, with stockpiles of 18,000 tonnes of rock salt. We've gritted the roads. We've done 1,020 gritter journeys with 23 gritters. This is a council which cares and pulls together, Madam Chairman. You know, because of the snow during that particular incident over winter, we put teams of 8 and 10 teams out in the north, 6 out in the south, and we gritted all the COVID vaccination centres and lateral test centres and kept them open. We closed the sites initially, of course, just so that we could bring about a social distancing to protect our operatives. And that's what makes us continue to do that type of thing at the moment. We are fully cognitive of the challenges that are ahead of us at the moment. And, you know, the forward programme for delivering and helping both our districts and our boroughs deliver those houses, it will need a cooperative attempt from all of us, and we will do just that. And we will make sure that we do work with our district and borough councils in a cooperative way. And yes, winning fairer funding for LCC is still key. It's not over. The battle's not over until it's won. And I, for one, am not going to back away from that. And our MPs, particularly, need to note this. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will be voting for this budget with a heavy heart, but out of necessity to keep our budget balanced and the ship steady.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pendleton. Mr. Auld, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On what will be my last occasion of speaking at a county council meeting, I've listened very closely to the comments of colleagues across the political divide, and I'm quite intrigued by some of the comments that I hear about the increase coming up to 5%. Would they really us not be able to help elderly people? Would they really us not be able to help children who require very expensive placements? Would they really us not be able to help children with special educational needs? After all, at Hinckley and Bosworth next week, there's a Liberal Democrat proposal to increase brown bin tax by 25%. That's 5 times what we have in our budget today. I look at Empower, who have year on year for over 3 years said that this council is the best in terms of efficiency and effectiveness in England. That is something to be proud of. I'm not quite sure how the opposition can deal with that, but I'm proud of it, even if other people are not. And then I looked at the area that interests me the most, which is children and young people. It is incredibly good that the Troubled Families programme continues to be funded. How many more children would have come into care if that programme had never been run? And it is still running today. The values of the administration, to me, have always been that we look after the vulnerable, whether they're elderly, whether they're young, or whether they're in between. And I think we've done that, and we know from Ofsted viewpoints that we've done it effectively. Could have done it better with better funding. I don't disagree with that. That is down to government decision. And so I welcome in paragraph 129 the comments that an association that I was involved in chairing for 9 years, the F40 group, is seeing as the outcome of its work a move towards a national funding formula where all children will be treated equally. And when I hear people say you've failed, Byron, actually, it's their ignorance that is failing, because we started that campaign back in 1997, and we did not really get much of change out of government while Labour were in power until the coalition government and David Laws of the Liberal Democrats in 2010. Now we're able to report that there is a national drive led by the Prime Minister to make sure that children receive the funding that they need. I make that over 20 years, so your campaign is still short in time by comparison to the one that I was associated with. Madam Chair, I have been proud to be a member of this council, and I leave now to enjoy my retirement. I will be voting for this budget today. I think that what has been put forward is the best that we can get. I do have worries. My biggest worry is the potential impact of the cost of special educational needs. And I do think that the administration after May will have to make that a priority area with the government, and maybe even make it uncomfortable for some of the MPs who may prefer not to really take it on board. But beyond that, Chair, thank you all, and I will support the budget.
Thank you very much, Mr. Old, and you will be missed. Somebody not got their mic muted. Mrs. Taylor went down while she was speaking and wasn't able to finish her speech. I have got a discretion to allow her to start and speak again. I know, strictly speaking, a member can't speak twice, but as it was an IT failure, I believe it's reasonable for her to continue, and I will allow her 2 minutes to do this. So, Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for allowing me back in. I will just try and pick up where I think my internet dropped out. So I was just referring to the review of the children's social care that's been picked up again in November 2020, and we're also looking still forward to the review of the government's special educational needs and disability that was launched in September 19. And we've had an update that process is going along, and measures were in place to make the system more robust and high quality, and getting in early to really help those children in need. This is something I very much welcome. We need to get the basics right, and the earlier that families are supported, the better chance they have of becoming a stable and resilient family. National research has set out some of the systematic problems with the SEND system that are responsible for many of the high needs deficits that many councils are seeing, including ours. And this research will show those deficits coming forward. Amongst a number of the findings, research shows that there are structural features of the SEND system that could lead to deficits even if budgets were significantly increased, and that local authorities bear all the risk in this area and have no levers with which to influence demand and costs. This is very much the case in Leicester, and something that I will very much be feeding into this review and standing up for the children of Leicestershire. We need to make sure that we provide the best support for children and young people with SEND. All of the previous points that I've raised cost money, and we need to look how we deliver these services. The Children and Family Services have identified 16 million of savings. This includes savings of 13.2 million from the Defining Children's and Family Services for the Future programme. This programme of work aims to improve outcomes for children, young people and their families while delivering significant financial savings. The MTFS also includes the High Needs Block Development Plan, which is reducing costs through increased local provision of places, practice improvements and demand reducing initiatives. The aim of the programme is to ensure that the expenditure can be contained within the allocation through the Dedicated Schools grant. Savings of 26 million are planned over the MTS period. The Troubled Families Grant, a continuation of this funding has been advised for 2021-22 only, but the amount is still yet to be confirmed. We're hoping the grant will be at similar levels to 2020-21. We're very pleased that the government's confirmed the continuation of this grant.
Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, we obviously did quite a bit of your speech. Mr. Harrison, please.
Madam Chairman, did you call me?
I did, Mr. Harrison, yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Madam Chairman, I speak this afternoon as a Conservative politician. That's how I was elected and that's how I've behaved. I think there's obviously a lot of hypocrisy going on here today with when I hear other speakers with considerable knowledge of the Liberal Council that's increasing by 5%, 25% increase in bin costs, etc. I mean, it really is just so foolish. How many councils would like to say, yes, an opportunity to present a balanced budget? We are doing that this afternoon. We're also laying out a 2-year balanced budget programme. Now, that is outstandingly good to be able to be in that position. Yet if you listen to the Labour and the Liberal commentators this afternoon, you'd think it was the end of the world. We are in serious difficulties. We're experiencing a world pandemic. When we talk of the 10 years of how we restricted money, that's because a chap called Gordon Brown nearly bankrupted the country. So we came in and tried to put that right. This council has always behaved with the highest level of integrity and behaviour. And after all, Madam Chairman, how did we come to be voted 3 consecutive years the most efficient upper tier county council and unitary authority involved in it as number 1? So in council terms, as a football, it's winning the FA Cup, the Premiership and the European Cup. And we have that potential. We are that council. And yet listening to politicians talking today about mental health, very serious, Councillor Sheehan. But this is, a lot of it is pandemic problems. We will obviously all have to deal with that in time. That has absolutely nothing to do with this balanced budget that we're talking about today and we're voting on. Now, the other problem I have, Madam Chairman, is simply this. You vote for, that's great. You support, you vote against, that's democracy. But the normal rules in a serious vote like this, when I was a young man, they used to call it an enabling vote because you couldn't do anything until you got your budget passed. You wasn't spending money. What were you going to do? We can't live in limbo. So it is important. We are under law expected to produce as councillors a balanced budget. And this Conservative council's absolutely doing that correctly. But there is obviously difficulties. And this huge document here is based on honesty on where we are. It's not fabrication. We have a bumpy road ahead, but with the team that we have, and particularly with Byron Rhodes and all of the officers and the financial team directors, the way they've looked after this council's interest, and I described as financial engineering because of how they've been able to look at costs and not something that they'll just knock off. It's long-term development reduction. And that's the key to how this council has performed so successfully. But why haven't the oppositions, and this is something that I want to spend a moment, Madam Chairman, why haven't they produced an alternative budget? because really they're voting on the most important vote that we have in local government is the budget, and we do it annually. They have not produced an alternative budget, no figures, not saying where they'd cut. Obviously, quietly in the background, they're applying maximum costs where they can without the scrutiny. I think that is just sheer hypocrisy. They won't say how they would manage this council. They won't say which area they'd cut because they haven't got the courage. And some people in politics, and I've heard it described in the past, that when an opposition simply just says, no, we vote against it, are they too lazy or too incompetent to sit down and spend 6 months working hard to produce a budget, an alternative budget? It's so easy to be able.
Speech, Mr. Harrison, are you close to finishing?
All right, okay. Sorry. Could I just say, Madam Chairman, I support this budget 100%, and I commend it to the council and all of my colleagues to support this. And I hope that maybe the Liberal and Labour might think twice about their positioning. Thank you.
Mr. Harrison. Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's been an interesting debate this afternoon. I represent one of the most deprived areas in the county, where life expectancy is one of the lowest in the county. Many families on lower incomes. A good percentage of rented properties in the private sector. And I'm just concerned that how many people would have thought that 20 years ago we'd have such things as food banks, with people queuing to get food to keep them going for that week. Not many I'd have thought. Those who are not old enough to remember, but a family always tells me, you know, never let things happen like happened after the Second World War. When the troops came back and they couldn't feed the families. And that's what we're going into again. The problem is the government's let us down yet again. The Tories quote percentages, not actual money. Now, many members have quoted a certain council increase in bin tax by 25%. But it's how much it was in real terms, in money terms. If you look at the county budget, they're saying 5% increase. But in actual terms, that's an awful lot of money to these families. And what I would say to the Conservatives is quite simply, some of my residents can be put in the situation they're going to feed the children, pay the council tax, and pay the rent. They can't do it all. Something's got to give. You know, so let's have the reality here. We're talking about some very poor families who fall between these various security nets. They fall through those loops. I want to know, what will the Tories do about that? They have to survive every single day. Not next year, or 2 years' time, or 5 years' time. They've got to survive on a daily basis. Putting this council tax up this amount puts a lot of those families in a great deal of mental stress. So that you talked about this afternoon, you're going to increase that. And I want to know, as responsible councillors, you Tories, are you going to take the blame for that, for the mental impact this is having on these families? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. Mr. Bray, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I wanted to speak just briefly on the point that was raised about the infrastructure investment, and particularly welcome the comments made by Mr. Pendleton about the cooperative approach. And that is, you know, I'm very happy as leader, with the other hat on as a leader of a district authority, to sit down and work together with the county council to find out how we can do that. I very much welcome that approach. I would say gently to him, the best way of getting a response from me and others on that would be to take that approach rather than producing a paper and then stamping your feet and demanding that we do it. I suspect that isn't the best way to get cooperation, but put that aside, the offer's open to have a conversation on how we can work together on that. While I've got my microphone turned on, I think it would be remiss of me not to respond to a couple of the criticisms that we've had about my administration at Hinckley. and that is, well, two things I want to comment on. First of all, the comments about the green bin tax, and Mr. Bolter mentioned the use of statistics and the use of percentages. Of course, it's going up from £24 to £30. What I would say to Mr. Old is it could be far worse. We could be levelling it to the levels that the Conservative districts that charge for that services, which are all considerably more than us. And of course, the reason why the then Conservative administration imposed the green bin tax in the first place was because the county removed the recycling credits from the district. And you know, as one of my colleagues has pointed out to me, that if you add together the £5 council tax rise plus the £6 bin tax rise, it's still 6 times less than what the county council are going to be charging people on their council tax bills. And finally, I just, you know, I was on, a number of other councillors was on a con call this time last year. It's been mentioned that it's a year since the start of COVID. Well, Mr. Generick, 12 months ago, said to me and others that to do what is necessary to get yourselves through and get people through this council tax, get this COVID crisis, and the government would compensate. Well, the response in the spending review wasn't the extra money that they promised. It was to basically, you've got to stick your council tax up, what has been said by somebody else. I think it was Mr. Shepherd. That was the response: put your council tax up. And that is why, you know, Hinckley Bosworth will have to make the difficult decision next week to put their council tax up, which is the last thing I would want to do, and I'm sure it's the last thing they want to do. But the point is why Hinckley's having to do it, why the county council's having to do it, why Leicester City's having to do it, is because the Conservative government, it's another Boris broken promise, and they've welched on their deal to properly fund local government. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bray. I'd now like to call Mr. Rushton.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman, for calling me. Can I thank Mr. Bray for his comprehensive update on what the borough councils are doing at the county council meeting? Can I also reassure all members, and that's my own members plus leaders of the opposition, that there's not a day goes by without myself and Byron and officer support continuing to lobby for fair funding. You're right that we've not had success so far, but that does not mean that we should give up. It's important that we keep on. As Ivan said, he was successful in the end. I feel certain we'll be successful in the end, but it does, without it, you rightly point out, put us in a very, very difficult financial situation. We govern, as Lee Brecken said, as one Leicestershire Conservative. So our policies are good for the urban areas, they're good for the county. And with that comes very, very difficult decisions. We promised years ago when we first took over, we promised we would protect the vulnerable. So the vulnerable, unfortunately, are old people and children, and has been pointed out earlier, that represents 75% of our budget. Plus this year, you've all recognised that we have really stood up to the plate with our response to COVID. So when we had our group meeting, it was an exceedingly difficult thing to ask fellow Tories to vote for the maximum possible increase. And it is with a heavy heart, there's no doubt about it, it is with a heavy heart that we go to the electorate, going for 2% on the council tax and 3% for adult social care. But if we want to keep our promises, and as an administration, we are proud that we keep our promises, we have to go for the 5%. And then finally, I think the yellow and the blue team not putting forward a budget is, like Dan Harrison said, it's pure vanity. Of course, you can criticise that we've not achieved fair funding, but you certainly cannot criticise our budget because it is recognised that we've done everything we can for old people, children, and everybody who's been affected by COVID. So with that, Chairman, can I just hand over to Byron, who will sum up on behalf of the administration.
Thank you, Mr. Rushton. So Mr. Rhodes, as the mover of the motion, you've got the right to reply.
Yes, well, thank you, Chairman. Well, we had a wonderful debate and so many speakers participating, and I think this is to the credit of the County Council that we do have an active and flourishing County Council with members all taking part in it and doing it in a good nature as well, because there have been no personal attacks or that sort of thing, which you do see sadly in some other councils. And we do respect our different points of view, although we don't always agree. Let me just take the attitude first of all. I mean, the leader pointed out there have been no amendments. Mr. Harrison, what a pleasure it is, by the way, to see him back in his seat and seemingly well recovered from his ordeal with COVID. And I am so pleased that he's here, firing on all cylinders. But look, he pointed out no amendments, no alternative budgets from Labour or the Liberal Democrats, and Labour there is Dr. Ireland right kicked it off. Well, we agree with a lot of what you say, said Dr. Ireland, and we'd probably do the same if we were in power, said Dr. Ireland. But we're going to vote against because we're red and you're blue. Well, it's the way of things, isn't it? She puts me in mind a little bit of my late Auntie Kathleen, who once said to me, you know, if they cut our arms off, Byron, she said, it would be like a stick of Blackpool rock. Instead of saying Blackpool, though, it would say Conservative, because it's in my blood. So I am a political animal, and I am a Conservative, very proud to be that as well, because I think our values and our approach to management of public affairs is the right way. Let me take just a few other points. Dr. Reiner mentioned Durham. Durham, they're good friends. I mean, we did work quite well with them when we were looking into the possibility of a unitary council, if you remember, and the leader came down to talk to us. A very nice man he was too, formerly of Leicestershire, or Leicester actually, I think he was originally, or his family were anyway. But Durham get, in terms of business rates and grant per head of their population, at £433 per annum. We get 197. They get twice as much government grant and business rate share as we do. No wonder they're able to do a bit better, you know. Their mouths are being stuffed with grant. In fact, actually, they get rather more grant than do Hillingdon Council in London, which is the Prime Minister's constituency council. So they actually are a little bit better off. But good luck to Durham. I don't criticise them for it, and they're able to do more. Wish we had the same funding as Durham. If we were funded as well as Durham, we'd have another £166 million a year to spend. What would that do for us, eh? Anyway. Liberal Democrats, Mr. Mullaney kicked it off there, didn't he? You know, well, blaming us, we haven't got fair funding. Well, we haven't got fair funding yet, and that's the point. We will stick at it, as Mr. Old pointed out. You know, you do have to keep at these things. And okay, we've been at it since pushing it since 2014. The government said they'd do it in 2016. And by the way, I was going to slightly disappoint Mr. Hunt, and I thank you for his praise for the work that I do. I'm standing again for in May, and it depends on, of course, the good people in the Beaver Division whether they elect me. But if they do, I shall be back. Whether I'm lead member for resources or not, it depends on the leader. But I shall be back. I can tell you that. I don't give up that easily, and I'm not going to give up, at least unless I'm forced to give up for reasons which are outside my control. I was very impressed by some of the impassioned speeches by some of the opposition about the impact on people. You know, I feel this just as much as they do, and particularly I think Mr. Sheehan put it quite well, and also so did Mr. Bolter in the speech towards the end of the debate. You know, look, the last thing we want to do is to hit and to disadvantage people who are not so well off. And I wish we could avoid this. If we had the fair funding, we wouldn't be putting up that. We wouldn't be taking this 3% adult social care precept. And there's one last point I want to make, which is, and I think the only speaker that mentioned it, and this is Mr. Bray, and I'm so encouraged that he wants to work with us over the question of bringing in developer contributions for the capital programme. I know he's made the point about, you know, the way we published our proposals, but look, we have to work with districts, and that's what we have to do. And we need all 7 to come together. So I'm happy to finish on that note, Madam Chairman, and we'll go to the vote, no doubt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rhodes. A recorded vote is to be taken in accordance with Standing Orders 28.4. I will ask Lauren to do the roll call. Please keep your microphone muted until you're called to vote. So, thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as the Chairman mentioned, the Council's constitution and standing orders reflect the provisions in the Local Government Act and the requirement that the proposition to budget meeting is recorded in the minutes to show how members voted. I'm going to read your names out and ask you please to indicate if you're voting for or against the motion moved by Mr. Rhodes and as seconded by Mr. Shepherd. Mr. Barclay. Mr. Barclay. Mr. Barclay. I'll come back to him. Mr. Bedford.
For.
Mr. Bentley.
For.
Mr. Bill.
Against.
Mr. Blunt.
For.
Mr. Bolter.
Against.
Mr. Bray.
Against.
Mr. Brecken.
For.
Dr. Bremner.
For.
Mrs. Broadley.
Against.
Mr. Charlesworth.
Against.
Mr. Coxon.
For.
Mr. Crooks.
Against.
Dr. Einan.
Against.
Dr. Feltham.
For.
Mrs. Fryer.
For.
Mr. Galton.
Against.
Mr. Gamble.
Hello, James.
Mr. Gamble.
Yeah, no, I just seems to have thrown me out.
Mr. Gamble.
He's left the
Gamble's
meeting.
had to leave the meeting.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Gillard.
For.
Mrs. Hack.
Against.
Mr. Harrison.
For.
Dr. Hill.
Against.
Mr. Hunt.
Against.
Mr. Kaufman.
Against.
Mr. Licorice.
For.
Mr. Mear.
Against.
Mr. Morgan.
For.
Mr. Mullaney.
Against.
Mrs. Newton.
Against.
Mr. O'Shea.
For.
Mr. Orson.
For.
Mr. Osborne. Oh, Mr. Osborne's not here, is he? Mr. Old.
For.
Mrs. Page.
For.
Mr. Payne.
For.
Mr. Parton.
For.
Mr. Pearson.
For.
Mr. Pendleton.
For.
Mr. Phillimore.
For.
Mr. Poland.
For. I've just talked to Councillor Barclay and he's having technical troubles, but he's trying to join back in now.
Thank you. Mrs. Posnett.
For.
Mrs. Radford.
For.
Mr. Rhodes.
For.
Mrs. Richards.
For.
Mr. Richardson.
For.
Mrs. Richardson.
For.
Mr. Rushton.
For.
Mrs. Seaton.
For.
Mr. Sheehan.
Against.
Mr. Shepherd.
For.
Mrs. Taylor.
For.
Mr. Welsh. Mrs. A. Wright.
For.
Mrs. M. Wright.
For.
And Mr. Wyatt.
Against.
I'll try again. Mr. Barclay.
He's got very bad IT issues, Lauren.
Thank you. So 34 votes, I think, for Chairman. I'll just count again. Yes, so 34, obviously excluding Mr. Barclay, 4 and 17 against, I think. Just double check again.
We can confirm that. We've been doing the count here as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I can't record a vote for Mr. Barclay. Unless can you hear now, Mr. Barclay? I can see you back on the screen.
When I spoke to Councillor Barclay, he indicated he was in favour of the budget, but I don't suppose.
No, I think we'll leave it at that if that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Lauren. Before I close this meeting, I would just like to remind you all that this will be the last meeting that I chair fully. At the next meeting, I relinquish my role as chairman. But before I close the meeting, I would just like to thank all of the officers for all the valuable support that they've given me over my 2 years, kept me on the straight and narrow. And I appreciate all the work that they've done to support the role. I would like to thank all of you members for your support during my term of office. It is valuable that the chairman gets that support. For those not standing for elections, I wish you all well for the future and hope that you remember your days as a Leicester County Councillor happily. And for those seeking re-election, I would also like to wish you all well and good luck to all of us. So thank you very much. I now close the meeting at 4:45. Thank you all for what's happened today.
Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.